to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today I'm with Adam Chalmers from Cloudflare. He's a software engineer over at Cloudflare. Hello, Adam. How are you? Welcome.
Hi, it's great to be here. Doing well. How are you?
It's still recovering from Chinese New Year and doing a little bit of catch up on work. You know, but I wanted to ask you about, what's going on at Cloudflare, right? Because you guys are doing quite a lot of interesting things. Maybe we can talk a little bit. What is Cloudflare exactly for people who are underneath a rock, basically?
Yeah, so Cloudflare is basically a business with a really big network of computers. And the main goal of our business is we have a lot of servers with a lot of compute and IO, and we're really close to your users, basically. We're like within an eye blink of latency from, I don't know if it's 95% or 99%, but a lot of the internet population. So we use all this compute we have really close to users to basically provide a couple of services like really fast DNS resolution. That's what a lot of people know us for, like having a big public DNS resolver called 1.1.1.1. Or you can use us to basically protect your websites from DDoS or to speed up everyone getting your static assets by using us as a CDN, or businesses use us to basically replace their VPNs because VPNs are slow and they get overloaded, but we've built out this huge network around the world. So you can kind of use us to route your data around the place.
Yeah, I think that Cloudflare, like you said, really powers quite a bit of the internet. So many websites you go to and you find out that they're down because Cloudflare tells you that they're down, right? And that's usually because they're using that proxy in between that helps to cut down quite a bit of data transfer between the server and people.
So basically, say you have a website and you're running it on a small server somewhere and you want to try to make this server more scalable. You can either get a bigger server with a lot more, CPU and RAM and IO capacity. Or what a lot of people do is they'll put it behind Cloudflare. So basically, when a viewer wants to go to your website, the viewer will first pass through Cloudflare. And we have this big network of computers all around the world, and we're probably going to be pretty close to your user. So then the user can hit Cloudflare, and they'll
Okay, go ahead.
say you've got a website, and suddenly overnight your website becomes really popular. You can maybe you're starting to run out of server capacity, right? You're running out of TCP connections, or the latency is going up because your server doesn't have enough CPU cores to, render all the requests it's getting. So instead of buying a bigger server, you can instead start using Cloudflare. So basically, you change your DNS records to point to Cloudflare. We're going to handle the kind of incoming traffic for you. We're going to do stuff like check, is this traffic actually coming from a bot or someone trying to DDoS you? And we're going to recognize these bad actors and block them. Then we're going to say, okay, instead of going straight to your server, do we actually already have a locally cached copy of it? Because your server might be, say, in New Zealand, and the viewer might be in, say, Washington, D.C. And it's a really long distance for light to travel to make a round trip to your website and back. But if we have a locally cached copy in a data center really close to your user, then they can get a really low latency copy of the website from our cache or our CDN. So people put their websites behind Cloudflare basically to get better performance and better security.
Yeah, and the nice part about Cloudflare is what I understand is, of course, you need the fingerprint, you need to make sure that, e-tag, there's different ways to have browser caching and everything. And Cloudflare is able to kind of take a look at your website and somehow do the caching for you. So even though maybe you do a new deployment, maybe your assets stay the same, but I think it does some kind of checking. Nothing you need to do out of the box, and it can already figure out, okay, these things I already have cached at the edge. No need to recheck. Or if you do replace, say, your CSS or whatever, it could see that and then pull that to the edge, and then serve the new one, right?
Yeah, so we kind of try to make it, sensible out of the box. So, not cache things too aggressively that are going to be changed. Yeah, we can detect changes and, we try to not serve a stale copy for too long. But, there's a whole flexible rules engine you can use to say exactly what kind of things should be cached for how long. And with some newer products, you can host your website on Cloudflare directly. And then there's, no server that you have to maintain anyway. So we kind of always know in that case what is the latest version of it.
But Cloudflare has so many different products. I think you might touch on the DDoS for sure. DDoS protection. But they also have like, as I've been saying, edge, right? There's edge computing. I think that Cloudflare's kind of been on the, well, sorry for the pun, the edge of where you guys are really letting people to run stuff on the edge. Is that still the case? Because I did see edge computing kind of go down a little bit in terms of people checking it out.
Yeah, so I would say that all of Cloudflare is an edge computing company. When I mentioned that we have servers all around the world and we're really close to, like, we're within a blink of latency to most of the internet population, I'd say that kind of makes us into an edge. And to be honest, we've kind of stopped using the term edge inside Cloudflare because we find that ordinary users don't know what it means, and technical people don't care what it means because, like, okay, whatever, edge, schmedge, just tell me what the latency and uptime that I can expect are. But yeah, what you're kind of alluding to is that you can run your code directly on Cloudflare's infrastructure. Like, if you're going to have a separate server somewhere that hosts your website and all your visitors are going to go through Cloudflare to get to that website, well, why not just host it directly on our infrastructure instead? And that's why we have a thing called Cloudflare Workers.
Now, can I just hand it, say, a Rust binary and say, okay, run this? Or like, what kind of things can I actually run on Cloudflare?
So in Cloudflare Workers, we can basically run anything that you give us as either JavaScript or WASM. So any WebAssembly binary, yeah, it's not exactly that straightforward. You can't just give us an arbitrary binary and run it. Basically have to give us, like, there's a couple of ways you can package it. You can package it as a node module that, meets some kind of interface, like it accepts some request type and it outputs a response type. Or we have like a little library that kind of wraps this up nicely for you called workers, where you can, basically take in a web request as a Rust object and an HTTP response. So it's not just a binary. Although I think now that the WebAssembly system interface has been integrated, I think you can now like output, text, and it will get rendered as a HTTP response.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I mean, how many people are actually, do you know, have any idea how many people are actually running on Cloudflare's Edge cloud system?
Like how many people using this workers system?
Yes. Well, I know I was trying to use it as we are talking before the show, but I couldn't get my case working properly.
I don't have stats about how many people are using workers, unfortunately, but I know that a lot of big companies are building stuff on workers. If Yeah, I can try and look that up after
Sure.
we talk, but yeah, I don't know off the top of my head because I don't work on the workers side of things.
Yeah. I was kind of curious, like, what kind of things can you actually do with workers? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah. So, firstly, like my personal blog is hosted on workers. Basically, have a static blog, and so all the assets that it generates, are going to be, a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of CSS, but mostly just images and HTML. So I have actually served that entirely on the Cloudflare Edge. I used to have it kind of go out to a GitHub page and then put Cloudflare in between the viewers trying to view this and my server, or the GitHub page server. But then I thought, okay, well, why am I bothering to have like two systems when I could just have one? So, and you can serve entire websites on workers, and they don't even have to just be static because the server part, right, the part that actually runs code, as I said, you can generate those responses from JavaScript or from Rust. And so when someone goes to your website, you know, the DNS record is going to resolve to Cloudflare, and Cloudflare is going to figure out which program to run to for that website, and it's going to pass in the HTTP request, and your server is going to output some HTTP response, and Cloudflare runs that for you and sends back the response.
Is there actually an easy way to test most of this stuff locally? Because my big issue with having this kind of like, okay, you give your stuff over to somebody is that you want to be able to make sure that stuff actually work, right? I mean, if you stand up some local server instance and do check routes and things like that, it's pretty easy to do. But for Cloudflare, you can have different workers at different routes, and you can have also some other, I think there's some UI stuff that you can do where you can do some, I don't even, it's been so long since I played around with it, I forget most of it. Like, how much of the stuff can you actually test locally before you say deploy it?
Honestly, that was the really big pain point for the first couple of years of workers. I tried to use it and I got kind of similarly frustrated by the lack of local testing. It has recently gotten a lot better in the last year because we have open sourced the runtime that actually executes these requests. So now that we've open sourced it, we can let people download it and basically run it locally. There's a software called Miniflare, which you run locally, and it basically simulates a little Cloudflare server. So you can run your workers on that and then push it up to the main workers thing. But again, I don't work on the workers team, so I don't want to give people the wrong information here. So my impression is that was indeed like the main pain point of using workers, but I'm pretty sure it's gotten a lot better in the last 6 months.
Okay, then before I keep asking about the same things you you don't know, let's move on to what you do. So, do you mind to introduce exactly what you're working on every day?
Yeah, sure. So I work on almost a totally separate branch of Cloudflare called Cloudflare for Teams or Cloudflare Zero Trust. And we're
Mhm.
basically building like a replacement for corporate VPNs. So a VPN's job is to let all the employees of your company securely access things that only those employees can access, right? You might have company data that's stored behind the VPN, or company chat apps that require you to be on the VPN, and so you log onto the VPN and then you can access those things. So let your employees in, keep non-employees out. But VPNs have these two really big problems, which is firstly scalability. A VPN can easily get overloaded, and so in 2020, when suddenly this pandemic happened and everyone's trying to work from home, the VPN was probably only configured for, a dozen people who work remotely. And now suddenly you have, hundreds of thousands of employees trying to log onto the VPN, and so it crashes. So scalability is one big problem with VPNs. And the other one is they have this kind of eggshell model of security where you're either in or you're out. If you're in the VPN, you can access all the things the VPN protects. If you're off outside, you can't access any of them. But this kind of all or nothing security is not really ideal because you want to be able to have, say your HR software should only be accessed by the HR team, and your GitLab host should only be accessed by engineers. And VPNs can't really support that. So what I work on is a more secure version of a VPN that's powered by Cloudflare. So you basically, if you're, say, running a team of people working at a company, you log on to Cloudflare from all of their devices, and we, Cloudflare, know like which user is on each device. And then you can write rules like only users in this user group should be able to go to these websites. If your user is going to a website in the category of like phishing or viruses or like disreputable websites, then make sure they load it in a remote browser because it's kind of risky. Or, at least like log that they were going to a phishing website so that later on in time you can go and query and figure out, okay, was there a data leak here?
Okay, so you're doing all that spying stuff for all the different companies. Yeah, you're not a good friend of a lot of people. I think, right? People don't want people to know that they're checking out phishing or whatever else at work.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think this is like a vastly net positive because a lot of like bad people out there trying to target people just based on where they work because they figure, okay, well, if Joe works at the Department of Defense, then if I can hack her at home and she's going to have this malware on her laptop, and then she goes and takes it to work, and then she's going to go and infect the work lab or whatever. So yeah, I kind of think that businesses have like a lot of difficulty keeping their employees digitally safe, and so that's what we try to do.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? If people are being targeted specifically, oh, this guy likes phishing websites. Let's try to inject something into his, I don't know, whatever, or send him an email about phishing stuff and see if he can target him, right? Things like that.
Yeah, there was like a big. The one I always remember is The Onion, the comedy news website.
Yes.
There was like a targeted phishing campaign against them where they enumerated every employee email and they sent them all like a phishing email. And it only takes one person clicking an email to then compromise the entire organization's security. And then then everything goes downhill. You end up in like situations like Equifax and big data breaches and everything. So, yeah, we're kind of in the corporate security business on my team. Specifically, my team, we work on what's called data loss prevention. So basically, trying to prevent these huge data breaches where you have something like the Equifax breach. So my team kind of lets you write rules that have traffic regexes. So you can say, hey, if employee from this user group is sending like 100 social security numbers to pastebin.com, then block that.
You can be that fine-grained control what you're pasting through the browser with Cloudflare.
So yeah, that's the goal of the zero trust team. So in order to make that happen, we basically intercept TLS. So generally, an HTTP request can't be inspected by these kind of what you call like middleware, like Cloudflare or man in the middles, or there's probably some other term for it now, but because corporations actually want us to be inspecting their traffic, they're actually paying us to inspect that traffic. So they basically install a special TLS certificate that Cloudflare publishes, and that lets your browsers know it's okay that Cloudflare is going to impersonate, say whatever gmail.com or whatever. And then we can decrypt the TLS, look at the content being sent, we can run regexes on it, we can analyze it for all kinds of patterns, and then we apply whatever rules your system administrator has put on there. And then we package it up and send it off to the server that you're trying to actually view.
Yeah, so you like you said, you're basically man in the middle kind of style. And yeah, I do remember working at Motorola when I was interning, and we did like if you use IE, this was a long time ago, back when IE was IE6, real long time. And I remember like everything worked fine, but you could still install Firefox because they know that most websites at the time were not really IE compatible so much with IE6. And that one, like you had to actually like set up that certificate because I had a proxy in between to capture everything, and otherwise everything would be shown up. Oh, this is being intercepted. Watch out. So I think that's exactly what you're talking about. The same thing, right?
Yeah. It's like a corporate proxy that people use to run whatever kind of rules they want to. So, you can obviously use this for like shitty purposes of like watching what all of your employees do, but if you're on your work Wi-Fi on a work laptop, there's almost certainly something doing that anyway. And you probably don't have much expectation of privacy on a work laptop on the work Wi-Fi. So, but I think it's really important because companies have so much of our data these days, and you see, like ordinary people getting like paying the price for like companies not having good security, right? Like in the USA, I moved to the USA 5 years ago, and everyone's like, here's your social security number and keep it safe. Don't ever let anyone know it because if anyone knows it, you're screwed. You can never change it, and they're all just going to have your identity. Also, you have to give this number to basically every corporation that have like any relationship with. Like your phone company has to have it, and your home insurance, whatever, has to have it, and your doctor has to have it. So, these data breaches like Equifax, they really mess up people's lives. So, I think it's worth trying to stop stuff like that happening.
Yeah, that's the weird thing about the Social Security thing in the U.S. Like because we don't have a national ID, they treat Social Security number as the ID. That's my understanding. And like you said, yeah, they said don't give it out to anybody because yes, and then everybody asks you for it. Banks, credit card companies, whatever, and everybody has it, and it's even sometimes guessable, which is even more freaky because they get
Wait,
reused.
it's
Yeah,
guessable?
something like that. There's ways that you can guess it, right? Because the number, if I remember correctly, first of all, the numbers have to be recycled, right? And I'm pretty sure that the numbers have some meaning to them, like area codes, right? If you see an area code, you know that that person is in that area, right? Like New York, I think has at least two. Chicago has two area codes. So if you see like 773 and 312, okay, that person from Chicago. I forgot what it is for New York. Yeah, nowadays, of course, you can port your number. You can also request numbers from different area codes for your cell phone, but in general, it still stays about the same. But like, yeah, you can guess these. Like, let me give you a thing. So, my father has problems at work sometimes because again, he has his social security number to his work because you have to, right? Because you have to give social security, right? And my dad and his brother, my uncle, work in the same company. Both have the same initials, and their social security numbers are actually one different, just one number different. Because back then, when they hand out social security numbers, there was a pattern where you would just, I don't know, I don't remember what he told me something about like they would when they applied for it, they got them all like in the same thing. Whatever happened, they're really only one number different. So not only do they look the same because obviously same parents, similar names. I mean, the initials are the same, right? And then now, like, yeah, so then they work at the same job. So sometimes he gets stuff wrong because the office screws up because again, you're just looking at paper, right? So if you see like just the first initial last name, they got the same. And then the social security number is one different. So there's a lot of mess up sometimes with this.
Oh my god.
Yeah. And like I said, they're guessable is what I remember from somebody was saying that online. Maybe I got the detail wrong, but yeah, like you said, if you know somebody's social security number, you can do some real damage. But at the same time, it's not shouldn't be. It should be difficult to guess, but we should really get away from that system. Like I'm fine for national ID. When I came to Hong Kong, I actually had to get an ID card once I got like a visa to let me stay for like at least a year. You have to. It's the law, and it's makes things easier. You just hand out your ID number, but the ID number also is kind of a secret thing too. You shouldn't be handing out to anybody. But at the same time, they do the same thing. I go to the doctor, got to hand my ID card. I got to go do whatever, hand over ID card. That's the annoying thing. So now I see the ID number basically really the same as social security number. Australia must be something similar, right? I think you have a national ID card.
We don't really have a national ID card, but honestly, I'm not really sure how it works. I know you have like a tax identity, but it's not something that you provide like everywhere. The closest thing would probably be like your national like health insurance card, because we have like a national insurance scheme, so every Australian has like a Medicare number.
Mm.
I know that in Estonia, they basically do like public key crypto as their national identity scheme. Like everyone gets like basically a YubiKey or whatever the equivalent is there, and you can kind of use that to authenticate yourself for all the government services. I remember learning about that in university for a practical network security course. And of course, that means every couple of years they have to like reissue everyone's, because there's some hardware attack discovered where everyone can like own all the network key, all the YubiKeys, whatever. But I guess when you have a country small enough like Estonia, it's probably not that hard to re-roll the keys for everyone compared to 300 million Americans, and most of them are going to live in small towns somewhere with like no real like big Amazon distribution center or no logistics network really close by.
Yeah, that makes sense too. But that kind of reminds me of like when I went to get my driver's license renewed. Supposedly, I mean, they could do everything same day, but you always have to wait a couple weeks because they got to send your ID to the federal office to get recorded, right? So you think that the government may not have your ID, but they have that as soon as you create it, which is basically your driver's license. I think you know that by now, at least being in the U.S. It's kind of weird that like your driver's license is your ID. Like when I came over here, my driver's license looks like a library card in U.S. It's literally just laminated with a piece of paper in between. There's no picture on it, no nothing, because you have your ID card over here, right? So if you get pulled over, you'd probably hand over both, which I haven't had. But yeah, literally just I'm serious. It looks like a library card when I had one when I was real small. It's
I
really
mean, my
creepy.
social security number here, my social security card is just a piece of paper
Yeah,
with no, it's not even laminated. Like,
yeah,
I wish I could laminate it. They wouldn't even let me do that. And
yeah,
okay, don't lose this because we can't replace it. Okay,
yeah,
rest of my life, I'm just gonna have to keep this piece of paper here in my wallet safely. Okay, we'll see.
yeah. And to be honest, I can't think of any time when I actually had to have the physical card because you just remember the number usually. I don't know about you, but I remember my number because my mom said, "Yeah, you got to remember the number because people are gonna ask you, your employers, everything." So I just remember it.
Yeah, I remember the number too, but I don't know. Sometimes need it for like getting a driver's license. It's one of the points of identity you can provide,
Yeah.
or yeah, it's sometimes used for verifying your identity.
Actually, the
Not that it
other
does a good job, because anyone can just steal it from me and use it, but whatever.
the other weird thing too is like in U.S. I know you could just give first and last name. I don't know about if you you're sure you probably have a middle name also, right?
So you can just give your first and last name.
For like your identification. So what I'm talking about is this: like when I came to Asia, I have to use my full name all the time. My driver's license in the US has only first and last name, I believe. It should be only first and last name, not my middle name, because I think sometimes you can choose whether or not you want to add it on. So when I went to get my driver's license, so you can convert your license over usually when you're overseas. I think I don't know. You were driving in Australia. I'm guessing you can probably convert it over to US when you came to US. No,
I had to get a new driver's license actually.
you had to take the test and everything.
Yeah, yeah, I had to like go and like
Oh,
do the multiple choice question answer thing, and
oh
then
wow.
do the little driving around the block. I was really annoyed, and
Okay.
because it's Texas, they also made you watch like a whole video series about not drunk driving or not driving and texting or using your phone or anything, and it's very silly.
Well,
Like, I'm 31. I think I got this down by now, but who knows?
my very silly thing was that I can convert my license over basically very easily to that library card style, so I can drive over here. And I literally had to go to another room and with a witness, with some official, put my hand on the Bible, raise the other hand, and say, "Yes, I am the guy who's on my license with only first and last name. And in Hong Kong, I am the guy, the three names, right? The middle name also. It's very weird, but you can tell they do it all the time because they have this special room just for that. But I understand their side, right? Because that's the official name is the middle name with in between. And so if you only go by first and last name usually in the US, it's just so normal. So it's just kind of
Wait,
weird.
is this a special room just for the Bible, or do they have like other special books too?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, Hong Kong is really kind of conservative society. Like you cannot get same-sex marriage here, but if you get it outside and come back, they will recognize it. So they're kind of slowly changing. Before they wouldn't recognize anything. And also you have to also be foreigner. If you're a Hong Kong person and you get married outside and come back, they don't recognize it. If you're a foreign person coming here to work, then they'll give you like a spouse visa for same-sex marriages, etc. So they're actually kind of progressive in that stance, but they're very much a conservative society over here. So I don't know what happens about that part because there is quite a few refugees over here. It's quite a few people wearing the full, like, not just hijab, but, covering everything except for the eyes and everything. So I'm guessing they may have something like that, or maybe they just, yeah, I don't know what they do. I think it was a Bible. I didn't really focus too much. I was just in shock that I had to do this whole process of like, yes, I'm me. Yes, I'm me. Like that was my frustration. Yes, I'm me.
That's crazy. This is why my wife and I got married a few years ago. And we kind of keep thinking about like my wife's like, oh yeah, I think I want to change my name, and I'm like, honestly, you know how much paperwork you're gonna have to go through for that? You're gonna have to change your name and all these official forms and everything. Like, my ego is gonna be totally fine if you decide that's too much effort. I have no investment in this. Do you really want to make all this government work more complicated than it needs to be? I don't know.
From what I understand, when you get married and change your name, this is what I was told from my sister who did that. It's pretty simple, but yeah, of course, there's going to be a couple of years or so where you get like weirdness. For the most part, I heard it's pretty simple when you get married, but if you get divorced, if you just change your name randomly without getting married as a female or whatever, it's much more complicated. So I don't know the truth. I just know what people told me and what I kind of understand because it's so common to change your last name as the woman in a heterosexual relationship, right?
Yeah, I guess I just my mom has like pain in the ass stories from when she had to do that, but obviously, she's been married, 30 years or so now, so it's probably different by now.
Yeah, it could be different. But actually, we got to go back to the main topic. I mean, I enjoy this stuff, but people are here to hear about Cloudflare, right? Actually, one big question about this thing, right? So you have this man in the middle that's stopping everything and recording, etc. Now, does this mean that I have to install something on any kind of device, or just because you have that certificate and you have the man in the middle that you can capture whatever you need to capture? Because you're just saying you could capture, copy, and paste, right? Is it before even sending it, or you're just saying if you pasted it and then sent it, then you would capture it?
Oh, no, no. So we can't capture copy and pasting, but what we do is we can basically intercept any internet request that's leaving an employee's device and going through the corporate network. So I like to think of this in terms of like on ramps and off ramps. So your employee's data gets into Cloudflare through some on ramp. Then we do some processing to it. We run the rules engine, we block or log or, isolate traffic, and then we kind of off ramp it onto the internet. So the main on ramp people use is we have a little Cloudflare client that gets installed on your employees' devices. It's called Cloudflare Zero Trust, and it basically opens up a WireGuard tunnel to the nearest Cloudflare server. And all your HTTP traffic, or you can configure it that it does this for TCP and UDP and DNS as well. But all of your net traffic goes through this tunnel, this WireGuard tunnel, to get into Cloudflare. Then we decrypt the TLS stuff. We run the rules engine to apply whatever policy your organization's administrator has chosen. And then we off ramp it probably onto the internet. But we can also off ramp it into a lot of other places besides just the internet. Like if you have a private server that isn't actually routable through the internet, you can configure it so that when your employees try to get to it, we can send their traffic to this private server, but no one else on the internet can reach it, for example.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. So because I'm thinking like a lot of these corporates, right? They also have like a Wi-Fi that you can connect to with your personal device. So therefore, you would also be doing similar things, right?
Yeah, so the main on ramp that we use to get traffic from your kind of corporate devices into Cloudflare is that little client you install. But there's other on ramps as well. Like a lot of corporations use IPsec, which is a way to kind of tunnel IP over IP securely, so that you kind of build like a private connection between two internet routers. and they encrypt all the traffic between them. So we support IPsec, where we kind of do a similar process of decrypting it and checking all the traffic and then re-encrypting it and sending it on to the other end of the IPsec connection. And there's a lot of other protocols you can use. We basically have all kinds of customers with their own kind of weird, wacky corporate networks. I don't know if you've ever worked for like a big corporation that isn't necessarily a tech corporation, but they've just got the weirdest setups. They outsource some other IT firm to go and like set up their corporate network, and it's probably 10 or 20 years out of date, and every year they have to pay someone to come by and fix up, make sure all the new offices are connected to it and all that stuff. So we've got a lot of like gnarly networking problems to solve in order to make sure that like even really ancient, out of date, like behind the curve corporations can still connect to this and get their traffic into Cloudflare and get it back out the other end safely as well.
Yeah, you're just reminding me of I worked at this one very small startup, but they had like they called it a virtual CTO, which would, like you said, handle kind of all their stuff. And they're working in crypto, but based out of Hong Kong. And most of the time, at that time at least, you had to actually VPN to Singapore to do any kind of stuff where you're talking to exchanges. And they said, "Oh, you should get this VPN." And I'm sure they were probably friends, this VPN company and that virtual CTO. And well, we joked that it was called a VPN. It should be virtual private network, but we called it virtual public network because what would actually happen is we had like a static IP, I think, and we found that if you use the VPN, all of your ports were exposed. Yeah, so we took another computer, we just tried to connect, and we're like, we just connected to the IP, and we were able to connect to whatever port we wanted to on that machine that's using the VPN. Yeah, I saw your
Oh
face. It
man.
was very much horrified. That was the face. Actually, we didn't have that face because we had so many issues with them that we just kind of like, well, why are we not surprised? And then we did show the boss when he, the boss will usually come by and check every client once in a while, and we showed him, and he had a horrified face. So at least he cared. But yeah, you do get
Yeah,
these like things. Sorry, what you gonna say?
a lot of like corporate security is like speed, safety, usability. Choose zero. So
Yeah.
hopefully we're trying to make something better on all three fronts there.
Well, that was actually going to be my next follow-up question. Is like all this inspection and rules and everything. I can see why you need to use Rust, and you cannot use obviously Python or something to do all this kind of stuff. What kind of latency do you think Cloudflare is adding on to everything?
So we're generally going to be a net reduction in latency, but it all obviously depends what are you comparing us to. So you might think like adding in another like network jump in the middle is going to add latency, of course, but that is only true if you're going to the same like end location, right? So if say we can terminate the request to Cloudflare, or if we can route you to a data center that's closer by that has the data, then it's going to be a net reduction in latency. Like if your origin is on Cloudflare, or if we have a cached copy of the origin server, then instead of going to send your data, all the way from who knows, like Texas to New Zealand, your hypothetical employee in Texas will just go to the nearest Cloudflare data center in Dallas and then get a copy of whatever they need from there. And obviously, this doesn't actually work 100% of the time, but we're pretty smart about how much we can cache. And so generally, the impact of latency is not too high. Of course, the more and more and more rules we add, we've got some rules that let you do things like virus scan, right? So you could say files over this particular size or files of this type, virus scan them. And obviously, that's going to add in some latency.
Okay. I mean, when you arrived at Cloudflare, were they already doing Rust, or were you there at the beginning of it?
So that's a really, I actually came at a really interesting time at Cloudflare. I was referred by a friend of mine who we both worked at a different company, and he left to join Cloudflare. And a few weeks later, he was like, "This is really cool. You should come and join here too." And one of the things he posted to me that made me consider it was a photo from the Cloudflare Q1 2018 all hands meeting for all the employees with like a big slide deck, a big projected slide saying Rust is now fully supported for internal development. So, can I just give you like a really brief history of Rust to Cloudflare?
You
That
can
might just be
even
like,
give expanded if you like, because I'm really interested in the details. I'm also
oh
kind of
yeah,
curious about
sure.
what they were using before Rust. I'm guessing C, C++.
So, long time ago, Cloudflare was, yeah, like you said, mostly C and C++. A lot of Cloudflare started off basically using Nginx, which is a really popular like reverse proxy. And so we write lots of modules for Nginx, and we extend it in various ways. A lot of that's Lua, but we also wrote a lot of C and C++. And then we had a really bad bug. You might have heard about it, or I'm sure some of the listeners have, but do you remember Heartbleed?
Yes, I remember that.
So Heartbleed came out, and everyone was like, oh, this is really bad. Oh, okay, we got to patch this. And then people saw that and were like, huh, I wonder if other code has made the same mistake. And so we discovered this bug called Cloudbleed. I think someone tipped us off to it about it in a bug bounty or something, but had a really bad bug called Cloudbleed where we were leaking data from servers that we use in Cloudflare. So we scrambled to fix it and patch it up and check, who was affected by it and all that kind of stuff. And then basically after that, we said, okay, you know what? That's it. No more memory unsafe languages. We're stopping the C train. We're stopping the C++ train because, at our level of scale, we have businesses depending on us. It's a bad look if you start leaking businesses' private data. So we got really into Go at Cloudflare for that time period. And so Go became like the main language of Cloudflare. We made a bunch of contributions to the standard library, stuff like that. Then in 2017, we had people who wanted to start using Rust because they needed the performance, right? They didn't want to have to pay the cost of having garbage collection. And also, a lot of it's just also the type system, right? People wanted to use Rust's type system to get better guarantees about what their code was doing. Like people preferred, the results for error handling. Even just being able to have enums where you can say, my data is going to be this or that, but not both, and not neither. And if it's ever going to be nil, you'll know because the type signature says so, and you have to pattern match to unwrap it. So, yeah, that was 2017. We started shipping our first Rust code at Cloudflare. And at first, it was only a couple of services, but these were like very high performance requirement services. We kind of think about Cloudflare having two parts, the data plane and the control plane. So, the data plane is what actually proxies requests through the internet. And the control plane is basically the backend where customers say, how should we modify those requests in the data plane? So, when you log into the Cloudflare dashboard and you change a setting, you're using the control plane. But when someone views your website and they go through Cloudflare, they're using the data plane. Obviously, the data plane has much more stringent performance requirements than the control plane. If you add like a second of latency for someone updating a setting on the Cloudflare dashboard, it's not a big deal. But if you add a second of latency to, HTTP requests going through your website, obviously that's a huge deal. So we started using Rust to write new data plane services that were going to be really, really performant. Things like our edge rules that say, what kind of traffic should be cached, or what kind of traffic should be considered a DDoS attempt, or how do you recognize a DDoS attempt, or yeah, stuff like that kind of runs on almost every request that goes through Cloudflare. And then that was basically a success. People liked writing Rust, and there were teams that got a lot of mileage out of it. And so when I joined in 2018, I hadn't really used Rust for a job before, but I was curious about it, and I'd written some Advent of Code challenges in Rust, and I liked it because I could be a little bit more functional than I could be in Go. So my team, I liked Rust. My manager really liked Rust. And the third guy on our team, Chung Ting, he didn't dislike Rust. So we started experimenting with using Rust in places where performance didn't really matter, but just because we wanted to start using it. So we worked on Cloudflare Tunnel, and we started building an end-to-end monitoring tool that would basically configure a tunnel and send traffic through it, make sure it was all okay. And we wrote that in Rust to kind of get a feeling for how to use Rust as a team. And this was kind of my first time using Rust properly, and so I made a bunch of mistakes. Like, I didn't really know about Tokyo or async back at that point. I think that was in Tokyo 0.1 days. So, to run my requests in parallel, I just put one request on each core, and one request in like parallelism, not concurrency. So I put one request in each core, and I had to, rent an 8-core virtual machine from Google to make it run in a kind of decent time. But we started using Rust there, and we figured out how to deploy Rust and, how to use the internal Rust, continuous integration stuff. And it was pretty successful. So we started building backend services in Rust, like basic HTTP, just JSON, Postgres, kind of CRUD style backends. And that worked really well. We liked it. It didn't have any bugs. It was easy to navigate. And so at this point, I've done a lot of Rust to Cloudflare on both the data plane and the control plane. Actually, I'd say like most of the Cloudflare data plane is now written in Rust. A lot of teams still use Go for the control plane. I think Go is totally fine language for, building an API server, and it's really good at that. But I still prefer to use Rust because I like the tooling that I get from that, like Soday and Diesel, for example.
Now, is all the original C, C++ is that removed? Or because you didn't say too much about that. Now, there must be some pieces still there because it takes time to remove and rewrite, if even need to be.
I'm not sure how much C and C++ is left. I think there's very, very, very small amounts because we basically started using Lua to write plugins to Nginx, and the main Lua codebase is being ported over to Rust, basically. You may have seen a few months ago, we basically had a blog post about a library called Pingora that is our new kind of proxying library. And that was ported from Lua to Rust over a year or so. I got to kind of periodically check in with it and open PRs to it. So I can't say there's no C or C++ left. But in terms of the Cloudflare data plane that actually, handles HTTP requests from users to your websites, there's very little right now. The one place where I think there is still significant C++ is Cloudflare Workers, the functions as a service that we were talking about before. And that's because it's actually based on V8, the
Mm.
engine that powers Chrome, the JavaScript execution engine from Chrome. So we use V8 to kind of isolate things that can execute JavaScript and WASM. Obviously, if you're looking to execute JavaScript or WASM, there's V8 is like a battle-tested, tried and true engine. So that is a code base mostly maintained by Google, and it's all C++, although actually just 2 weeks ago they did announce that they were going to start integrating Rust into Chrome. So yeah, I guess even that will slowly start having new Rust added to it. I don't think Google plans to rewrite any part of Chromium in Rust, but I think they're going to support writing new parts of Chromium in Rust.
Yeah, I did see that they're really pushing it. I think the 0 day project probably helped a lot because there were so many bugs coming in. And it's just been a huge push to start getting stuff over to some kind of memory safe language. And obviously, Rust is kind of the leading on that part.
Yeah, it's exciting to see it getting into all these big projects like Chromium, Android, the Linux kernel. I think Apple has some Rust, but I'm not sure.
If Apple doesn't, I would be a little bit surprised because there was a period of time where the iOS devices kept getting hacked, like by this Israeli company or a couple others, I think, not just that one. And people are getting murdered over it because of what people are trying to get from people's devices, right? So if they're not, I would be a little bit surprised just because, yeah, like I said, like it was like every day it was like, oh, iOS has to be patched because now they're starting to share between the desktop and the mobile. So it's like, okay, if iOS has to be patched, most likely Mac OS does. And of course, iPad OS because it's basically iOS, but just slightly different. I think only the UI is different. But, anyways, that's not for this podcast. But yeah, like that was the annoying thing for a couple of months. I think it was like that. So I'm hoping that they changed over to help with this issue.
Man, when people talk about Rust being a safe language, I didn't think they meant like personal safety. No one's going to kill you to try and get your device hacked to get a 0 day out of it because it's written in Rust now, but that's a good tagline to put on the website or something.
Yeah, that definitely is. And actually, the other thing too that's quite interesting too is now it's kind of like the what is it? You want to protect people who aren't doing malicious things, right? But now I've heard already that there's some hacking tools written in Rust now because of course the bad guys see it as a positive, right? And so they're doing that for some things, which is a little bit scary because it's like, well, now what do we do now? Because before that we could exploit them, and now maybe we can't exploit them so easily. It's kind of like Apple had the thing where they didn't want to open up a back door, but I don't know what if they did or didn't. Maybe they did. I don't know.
They found the phone from the person who there was like a mass shooting in San Bernardino, and the FBI, I think, wanted Apple to hack into the phone or to publish. They wanted Apple to basically publish a version of iOS that could be hacked, and then they could make the guy's phone download the vulnerable iOS. But in the end, they basically canceled the lawsuit against Apple because, as you said, some Israeli firm like came up with a backdoor kit, like a rootkit to get in anyway. Man, I got some family in Israel. I have to like ask them how much of the GDP of this country revolves around like hacking into the iPhone. It seems like a very profitable industry if you can get into it.
Yeah, that's the scary part is it's an industry, right? Lots of law enforcement buy it. Not even just federal, also local and everything else. And you would think that it's only for criminals, but who's watching the Watchmen kind of thing.
Hmm. I do think that eventually, like, security products can be used by people trying to get security or people trying to compromise security. But I think, ultimately it's better to have, things like strong security guarantees probably help everyone because we make better use of our privacy than the hackers are going to make use of theirs. So, I don't know.
True. Well, also leave it up to some of these hackers who maybe are so like, oh well, I'm a good C++ developer. I don't need something like Rust. Rust is just for beginners or something. I can do this. You always hear that
The
argument,
idea of
right?
someone saying Rust is for beginners is like a really funny idea to me.
Or like, maybe not even. I don't think they use the word beginners, but it's like, I know what I'm doing for C++. I can do this. Like, but the funny thing is the Heartbleed that you mentioned, that was done by like, well, now he's the most famous programmer for Heartbleed, but it was done by a super famous programmer. I think that created Bash or something. Do you remember who did that? The Heartbleed?
I don't remember whose code Heartbleed was found in, but at the end of the day, like the reason that my team was so big on adopting Rust because we have this philosophy that like requiring discipline for every single decision is not sustainable. On our team we're like, okay, look, we're all good programmers, we all think we're good, but even the best people slip up. And requiring you to be correct every single time is not realistic. Requiring you to be correct, 99% of the time, even if that was realistic, that 1% of time you'll slip up and then you'll write bad code and you'll get hacked. And so it's better to make those kind of error cases impossible, right? To find a systematic solution that doesn't require programmers to be perfect every single time they sit down to write code.
Sorry, I remember. I was just looking up on the side who did the Heartbleed, and I thought it was somebody else, but maybe he did another bleed. There's a lot of these bleeds that happened for like a couple years, if you remember. I think that was a different bleed, but I'm just skimmed the article, so hopefully I didn't get this one wrong. But what was it? There's a guy named Robin Siegelman who created the bug, and he was working at late at night. That's what I think I'm reading over here. He committed at 10:59 p.m. on New Year's Eve. A 31-year-old in Germany, and somebody did check his code. And I don't know. This is Dr. Steven Henson, so he's a doctor of something. So it sounds like they could both know what they're doing, right? And they missed it, right? So no matter how good you are, we have a previous episode with somebody who's writing. I forgot the name, but they work on the Tor client and browser, or maybe not the browser, but they work on a Tor client and server. And if you listen to that episode, he himself has been doing C for a long time, and Tor stuff is not made for kids, right? It's super cryptography. You got to be very secure because, like we talked about before, people's lives are on the line if information gets leaked. And he's like, I don't trust myself to write when I'm writing C++, right? So somebody who does this stuff for a living and he knows the implications is just too scared to when he's writing code. But now he feels much better because of this. I mean, you're not going to kill all the errors, but these like things like Heartbleed are definitely going to stop. That's the
Yeah,
nice part.
exactly. It's like seatbelts, right? You can't prevent every single car fatality, but you can definitely, stop a lot of them with the right tooling. And, I think it takes an incredible level of ego, which I certainly do not have, to assume that you can write the correct code every time. My career goal was to actually never write a line of C++ because I hated my C course in college so much. I just got so many seg faults for everything. So, my goal was to just not write any C++, and that kind of limited the kind of software that I felt I could write. Okay, I was never going to write anything that was, super ultra high performance or super low down, close to metal systems work. So it was really liberating when I kind of started playing around with Rust and realized, oh, okay, there's actually a language that can get all the nice properties I want to have for performance and low levelness and facing directly with the system. But it doesn't require me to go and spend all this time practicing how to write C++ but not get hacked. Because, I certainly wasn't going to bother trying to write C++ at a place like Cloudflare where, if you get hacked, it actually matters. Maybe for a toy project, sure, but I think it's great because people, ordinary idiot programmers like me, can kind of sit down and start writing Rust and know that they're not going to accidentally expose all their users' data due to a memory buffer overflow or something like that. Obviously, you can still anyone can write 0 days in any language, but there's a lot of like work showing that you just write way fewer bugs that expose data in Rust. There was a study from the Android team that like the rate of bugs in Rust code that they wrote for the Android kernel was much lower. And that when they did write bugs, they were much less severe. They would maybe be like a denial of service, right, as opposed to a buffer overflow or arbitrary code execution. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in. I think using a language like Rust makes it expands the kind of jobs that a person like me can have, or the kind of roles or places you can run code that a person like me who doesn't want to spend 10 years studying the right C++ coding guidelines and getting all the painful experience and the lessons you can only really get through living them and, shedding the blood, sweat, and tears and everything.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about how Cloudflare handles kind of onboarding people to Rust, right? You said you were interested in Rust, but weren't really running it. But now you are, now the whole team is. How does Cloudflare kind of onboard people to use Rust?
Yeah, so when I started, there were very few Rust programmers at Cloudflare, and it's kind of expanded and grown and grown and grown. So we have a pretty large network of Rust programmers now. I think that is the most important thing for onboarding is that we have like a channel in the work Google Chat app called Rust Club that new people when they start writing Rust, they'll probably spend a lot of time there and they can ask questions. We've also got a kind of welcome to Rust page on the internal wiki for it lists a bunch of stuff like, tutorials and resources and good Rust books, but then it also lists like, here's how to get your project building in Cloudflare's CI system, and here's the like useful internal libraries to manage an interface with internal systems, and here are, like common cargo tools you might want to use, like cargo audit and cargo deny, things like that. Basically, collecting best practices from a lot of teams into one big wiki page that we can point new people at. But I really think there's no like better way to learn than talking to people who've already been through that. So I know that for me, I try to like spend a lot of time like looking at people in the Rust Club chat room and answering their questions. Do you spend much time on the Rust Discord or the Tokyo Discord?
I have it there, but I don't really look too much into it. Yeah.
So one of the things that I really like about the Rust community is that those two Discords are really active and people spend a lot of time answering questions there. Like David Peterson, the guy who wrote Axum, I think he was on an episode with you. He's
Yeah.
like he's available on the Axum Discord channel for like all of US working hours and a lot of hours before and after that. And so it's just really easy for people to get answers to their questions. Now, this is not perhaps the most scalable approach because you don't want to have to rely on having people online to answer questions every single hour of the day. But it is really high fidelity. Like you get a lot of it really stops you from getting blocked for too long. I've been trying to write like internal blog posts about how to do kind of common stuff without code base or presentations about the patterns that I use when I'm writing Rust services. And when I can, I try to write those into public external blog posts as well on my personal blog because, that way I can, instead of giving someone like a personal, like hand holding session about how to do something, I can be like, hey, here's the blog post I wrote for this exact question that beginners often have. So yeah, I think the combination of like written documents that you can point people to and actually having people available to answer your questions.
Okay. I didn't know if there was like a training manual or something like that. I know like there's a Zero to Production book that was written by Luca. And Luca told me that I believe he said that his company hands, or at least his previous company, used to hand out that book to basically all new beginners for, how to do things. So I thought that was quite interesting. I would figure that Cloudflare would have something really standard, like, okay, here's our maybe in-person training or on-person videos or something like that.
So we don't have anything that in depth like a Learn Rust course. I think we've kind of been able to rely on the fact that there are really high quality materials out there already. Like I should probably make sure people know about the Zero to Prod Rust book. That's the one where they walk you through like how to write like a web server in Rust, right? They write
Yeah,
like an Actix web server. Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, basically, what I understand is like actual practical based kind of training where they kind of figured out after trial and error what's the right way to do it, and then they just go that route. So I think that one's good. I mean, but that route may not work for everybody, right? That's just their style. But at least it's something that's practical. Like, okay, this is actually being used. Because I think still nowadays, most of these books for like web development, they could just be based on, okay, this is what the textbook answer is, but usually textbook and real life is never the same for different reasons, right?
Yeah, I actually really like this book. I wasn't sure if it was the right one I was thinking of, but it is the right one. And actually, the first big project I did at Cloudflare was writing in Rust, was writing an Actix web server. And this is before I think the Zero to Prod Rust book was out, but occasionally I'd see chapters on his blog or something. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a very similar approach to what I'm doing. So yeah, maybe I gotta recommend people like those kind of courses to people. But yeah, I think generally inside Cloudflare, we don't have like material designed to teach you a language. Like the main languages we use are like JavaScript, Go, and Rust. And I think for all those, there's enough really good materials out there for learning it that we can kind of just point people to that. I know like the Android team recently put out their own like Learn Rust course. I think it's called like something like a thorough Rust or comprehensive Rust training or something like that. But yeah, there's definitely companies out there that are putting together like Rust training courses for internal usage. But I think there's enough good stuff out there that it's not really necessary. And also for a year or so, like Steve Klabnik, who wrote the one of the co-authors of the Rust book, was working at Cloudflare. And so when he was there, I think he was really helpful for getting that culture of like, if you have a question, you can ask the question in the Rust club, and someone who knows Rust really well will help you out with that. So
Is there any rules on what kind of questions you can ask? Because, I can see both ways, right? You want to encourage people to ask questions, but at the same time, it's like, please don't ask like the same question over and over again. That's kind of like the most quote unquote noobist question. It's like, okay, don't ask me how to build your project, something like that. I'm just trying to think of something simple like cargo build or whatever. But of course, these things can also be complicated because, like, well, in release mode and debug mode, or what's the default? There's lots of questions from that one. But is there any rules based on what kind of questions you can ask, or is it just like, okay, every question is treated seriously, even if it's repeated, we will still ask you, or we will still answer, etc.
honestly, we have had that many questions that have both repeated very often and also very easy to answer. I think partly this is because a lot of people are going to be, if you're new to Rust, you're probably not writing a service from scratch, inside Cloudflare at least. You're probably working on a service that already exists, and so it's already got a lot of like patterns to copy from. It's like something I try to make sure that our code has. Like, it should be hard to do the wrong thing. If you're copying the code around you and the code around you is pretty good, just looking at, okay, how did the other people, extract an HTTP header or something like that. So I haven't really found that to be a problem we have to worry about. But the reason that I write a lot of like blog posts has been because I keep seeing the same questions asked over and over again. And so it's useful to have, usually they're not easy questions either, because if it's an easy question, you can just answer it and you can go away with your day. But you know how the HTTP library has this extensions type, and you see it used a lot in like a lot of Tokyo code, like a lot of Axum servers or a lot of Tonic servers as well. And it's a really confusing type. And when the first couple of times I saw it, I had no idea what it was doing or how it worked. And then eventually I was like, okay, I got to actually understand this. And so once I understood it, I wrote a blog post about it so that I could be like, okay, I know it's kind of weird, but here's like the thorough explanation. If you just sit down and read it, that should answer the questions. And I found that, writing that stuff down into documents that I can just link people to is like a low effort way to help them understand.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, I think having stuff written down, like even for myself, I write down for others. Sometimes I end up searching for it or pulling it back up for myself because you just forget if you haven't touched it for a while. Kind of
Oh,
random.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
always have to refer back to my blog post about const generics. Every time I try to use a const generic, I can never remember the order. I'm like, does the const generic have to go before the type generic and the lifetime generic, or does it go after? Okay, whatever. And I just look up my old blog post and I copy from it. It's not plagiarizing if you're copying from yourself, right? Then it's just being efficient.
Have you seen that meme where it's like two designers and one guy's like, "Hey, you stole from me," and then the guy's crying, and then there was two programmers on the bottom. "Hey, man, I copied your code," and the other guy replies back, "That's not my code. I also copied that one." Like we do that kind of stuff all the time. Just copy and paste. I mean, you shouldn't just
That's
copy and
great.
paste. You should read it, understand it, copy and paste it, and then modify if you need to. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah. I feel like it's a huge compliment from a program if someone else is like, "Hey, I copied your code." I'm like, "Oh, I'm so glad. Wow. I'm so glad you wanted to use it," as opposed to like, "You copied my art? That's my
Not
livelihood."
even that. It's like, "Pff, good luck with that. Maybe it doesn't even work." That's would be my reply.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Well, that's your poison or that's your suicide note right there. Like, good luck with
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I mean, I think I have like most of my questions answered. I mean, is there something that you think that the community should know about how you guys are using Rust or what you're doing with Rust, etc., that would be really interesting for us to know?
I think Cloudflare's use of Rust is interesting because we really work at like really intense scale. Like roughly like something around 20% of the internet uses Cloudflare. The 20% of the websites that get used use Cloudflare. So I think are in the unique position, or not the unique position, but we're in the rare position of actually really needing to use Rust for high performance code that is also really safety critical, right? Because we don't ever want to repeat that Heartbleed bug. So we're also in this place of using Rust for just ordinary stuff like backend servers and everything, because once you start using Rust for the high performance stuff, you get used to all these nice little things like cargo and enums and macros. And so we use it for a lot of stuff that isn't performance critical as well in the backend. But then we also write a lot of features using Rust and we deploy them to our own little functions as a service thing that uses the WASM side of things. So I think we use Rust in a lot of different ways, and you have people in different parts of Cloudflare who have like dramatically different needs from Rust. Like some people, like my friend Noah Kennedy, works on the Tokyo U-Ring project, and so he's writing like super performance critical Rust code. He sits next to me at work in the office, and so he's always telling me, Adam, I just wrote the most cursed implementation of like Paul underscore data. And it's so efficient. And by doing all this unsafe stuff here and here, I was able to like shave off the latency by like 20%. And I'm like, that is so great. And I hope I never have to write that stuff because I'm totally happy writing my backend where I'm allowed to have a few extra milliseconds of latency if it is like really readable. So it's interesting. There's a lot of different Rust projects there. I think we actually have a really large number of Rust projects, but I don't think we're as loud about it as other big companies are. Like I think Google and Amazon and people like that are known for having a lot of Rust, but I think that people underestimate how much Rust we have.
If you were to just, guess how much Rust is at Cloudflare, would you say 80% of your code base, 90%, 50%?
I'd say probably 50%, maybe 40%. I'd say we're like in the control plane, it's probably like one third Rust, two thirds Go. And then the data plane, I'd say it's probably two-thirds Rust, and then the rest is Go or Lua, basically. So I don't know. I guess like 50% is an okay estimate. Like that would be excluding the front end stuff, which obviously, the front end's written in TypeScript and JavaScript. But yeah, a surprising amount of stuff is written in Rust. Oh, and we have client software that's written in Rust. I mentioned at the start the Cloudflare client that runs on employees' devices and opens a tunnel to Cloudflare. So the networking libraries are written in Rust there. And we had to use Rust because we needed a combination of like high performance and being very platform agnostic. So you can, write this native Rust and you can link it in and you can combine it with the UI frameworks that run natively on Windows or Linux or Mac or Android or iOS, whatever you want to do. So yeah, we're kind of using Rust in all parts of the stack, on the like in the data plane, in the control plane, in WASM, even shipping Rust out to, millions of devices around the world that people install Cloudflare software on.
Okay. Yeah, that's not as much as I was thinking. I thought it was maybe really towards the 80, 90%, but still quite a bit. I mean, because you guys started writing Rust relatively recently, but it's a pretty big push. And I think mostly new things are being written in Rust, right? So it's just going to keep
I'd say
growing.
almost everything new in the data plane is written in Rust.
Hmm.
Probably a lot of the control plane is still mostly Go
Okay.
because just kind of unpacking JSON and
Yeah.
writing it to a database mostly. Though that's actually my favorite time to use Rust because I love the Serde library so much. Like it's so much better than Go's kind of comment-based approach to
Yeah.
JSON. You have these little annotations in the comments, and then you don't get the proper type checks and everything, and you have to write all these unit tests. And I also love the Diesel library. It's got a couple of problems here and there, like when something goes wrong, the errors are really unreadable. but I just love being able to have like type checked generated code for my SQL. Minimizes the amount of potential foot guns I have to worry about.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that Cloudflare that was the reason that Cloudflare went over to Rust, and it's good to hear that you guys are pushing it hard, and new stuff's being written in it. Yeah, I'm pretty happy to hear about this. So, are you guys hiring any Rust developers at the moment?
We are. Yeah, we have a careers page and a lot of new roles are looking for some experience with Rust because,
Okay,
like I said, increasingly the data plane is written mostly in Rust these days.
okay,
Yeah, if you're ever looking for Rust jobs, you can find me online and I can point you to whatever kind of open careers pages we have or job stuff. I used to always end my blog posts by mentioning my work email for people to send me resumes to. We actually hired at least one person through that. So that's nice to see.
oh, that's good. Okay, I mean, we went quite a bit over time. I appreciate that you could spend all this time and we could hear so much about what's going on. Yeah, I suppose I'm happy to hear, and maybe we can find some more great employees for you guys, so you can continue doing you know the community great, and also the whole web community itself a good job.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Oh, great, good to have you on too.